So welcome back to another stash busting monthly update. Much like last month, this month has not been great for me. So moderate your expectations. I'll be honest with you, I've been very ill. September and October I've been very ill physically and as well, I'll be honest, mentally. I've just not been in a very good place and that's okay, you know. For me, I just sort of have to accept that this is part of it. This is part of what I have to deal with, and I try and approach it like I would any other symptom of my condition, which is basically to manage it, make sure it doesn't get too bad, and then adapt and work around it. So one of the things this month that I wanted to do and that I find helps me when I feel like that is to do something to help other people. And obviously when you are very ill, confined to the house, in a very dark place, that's not always the easiest thing to do. I also, don't have a lot of money, so sort of charitable donations aren't really an option for me, financial donations. But what I can do, and I have done now for many years, is I can knit things. I have to be very, very ill to not be able to knit. Most days I can knit in some way or another. So that's what I've been doing for most of this month. As you probably know, most of us here in Europe have this impending winter energy crisis. Already in Britain it's starting to bite, and there are a lot of people who are really struggling to pay their energy bills and to keep warm this winter. Thankfully it's been relatively mild, the weather so far, but I've seen a lot of appeals for knitters to make warm weather clothing to give to members of the community who may be vulnerable or who can't afford to pay their bills. So that's what I decided I could do, was I can make warm weather clothing. I have a massive stash I'm trying to get through. So I went and looked through my stash to see if I had anything suitable, because the thing is, I personally have quite a high tolerance for wearing real wool, but I appreciate not everybody's like that. So I wanted to use things that were softer, maybe acrylic based as well, because if somebody is in a particularly hard time, maybe they don't have the time or the inclination or the means to be able to gently hand wash real merino wool, for example. So I pulled out a few things and I went through Ravelry and looked for free patterns so that I could make some things to give away. And I also know, because I do this often, I've got my contacts of places I can give to locally and nationally. And I often know that, so a lot of charitable knitting tends to focus on babies and smaller children, or sort of the stereotypical homeless man. You get lots of male adult size hats and you get lots of cute little baby things, but there's nothing really in the middle. So what I wanted to do was make some things that maybe a young woman would like, a teenage girl might like, because that's sort of the colours I had in my stash were leaning more traditionally feminine. And so I looked for styles that would work for that sort of somebody like me, or somebody younger than me, something like that. Because I often think about this. Yes, you're a teenager and you're desperately cold, and I'm sure you'll be grateful for something to keep you warm. At the same time, you still have all the other worries of being a teenager about looking cool, you've got to go to school, maybe you're getting bullied, all those sort of things. So I tried to be mindful of that when I was picking the things I was making. So I'll show a few of them to you. So the first one I made was the Twisted Turban Headband by North River Knits, and I made it in this Serdar Connemara. It's absolutely beautiful, this colourway of yarn, and it's discontinued now. I'm so sorry to show it to you and tempt you, and then, sorry you can't get your hands on it. But I bought this in a job lot at the Knitting and Stitching show many years ago when I was a student, and I knit my first sort of free-form jumper for myself. I was just sort of experimenting, and I loved that jumper. And it became really ratty. I wore it so much, and I was also wearing it when I made my duct tape dress form, and I had an explosion with the expanding foam. That expanding foam, very difficult to get rid of, and it went all over this jumper. So in the end, I just had to bin it. So I had some scraps left, and I made one of these sort of ear warmers, I think. I personally find if my ears get really cold, I get a headache. And so whereas it might not be cold enough to warrant a hat, if my ears are sticking out, if I've got my hair up or something, just if the cold bites at my ears, I'll get a headache. So I wear this sort of headband quite a lot in the winter if I'm just popping out and things and it's not actually that cold. So it's knitted in a rib, and is this chunky, bulky, super bulky? I never know the difference. Bulky, so this is 12 ply weight yarn, so it knitted together really quickly. I think I made this in an evening while watching Strictly Come Dancing. And it's seamed at the back. I'm sure you could probably find a way to do it seamlessly or make something similar seamlessly in the round. And then you've got essentially a massive cable to give the twist at the front, which was difficult to negotiate, I tell you. But this, yeah, was a very quick and easy project, and I think it's the sort of thing, it'll suit a lot of people. It's relatively size adjustable. Maybe it's adult size, I suppose, but whereas with a hat, sizing's more important, with this sort of thing, it stretches, it should be fine. So yes, so I made that one first of all, and I think it was 50 grams that I used up, 48 grams, yeah. So we're calling that one so far in October. This wasn't all of this yarn. I do have a little bit of it left, but some of them are really sort of straggly bits. So I don't really know if I'll be able to find a project to use up such a small quantity of yarn. It might have to be incorporated into something else. Or perhaps I just bin it, which I don't really want to do. But am I ever going to use this? We'll see. If you have suggestions, leave them in the comments for me. A lot of these projects were very quick, so it's only been a few weeks and I've made all of these, you know. I've been really enjoying practicing my crochet. It's one of those things I keep meaning to like get better at, I suppose. But like I say, because I don't necessarily really like a lot of crochet clothes, and there's the added confusion of the UK, US terms, and my own repetitive strain injuries, I've been struggling to force myself to practice. But with this Knitting for Others sort of project, it opened up my options a little bit. So because I'm not wearing it, it might be a more modern style that isn't really right for me, but might be right for somebody else. And that's when I came across this bucket hat pattern, which I know are all really in right now, but as I suppose like a younger millennial. I'm barely a millennial, but like I'm not really one of these trendy Gen Zers either. For example, I would not be seen dead wearing one of these because they just make me think of Kevin and Perry. And it was one of those things, they're in at the minute, they're cool now, so maybe somebody out there will be grateful for something a bit trendy. And this pattern is a Serdar pattern, one of the ones that they had free on Ravelry, the 10560 crochet bucket hat. Catchy name. Yes, now unfortunately, like I say, my crochet experiments, this was supposed to be adult size, but it actually ended up quite small. My crochet tension, I think, is a bit off, or maybe the yarn I used was the wrong sort of yarn. But this yarn is Hayfield Baby Acrylic or something like that. And it's what I used to knit my 1960s, well, to make my 1960s crochet dress. And I had quite a bit of it left over, so I've got several projects in this now. But because it's acrylic and it's baby yarn, it's very soft, so it was one of the reasons why I thought it'd be good for this project. So yeah, this is my bucket hat, but like I say, it doesn't really fit me. It's just a touch small, so it might have to be for a child. But oh boy, yeah, crochet. One of the reasons why I don't necessarily enjoy crochet as much is because I find you always have to count. You know, it will be 10 single crochet and then 2 single crochet in next stitch. So you always have to keep counting 1, 2, 3, 4. Whereas with knitting, you can just, once you've got the right number of stitches, you just go. You have to always keep count with crochet. And I find if I'm particularly foggy, I can't do that. So this was a bit of a struggle for me, I must admit. And like I say, it turning out too small. But I do think, actually, the pattern was quite successful. I think it's cute. It's definitely a bucket hat, isn't it? So maybe there's a little girl out there. I mean, there might be a little boy as well. You never know, I'm stereotyping. But maybe there's a little person out there who will be glad of a trendy hot pink bucket hat. And as for use of my stash, again, 49 grams. So we're calling that another ball of wool. 1 for the twisted turban and 1 for the crochet bucket hat. We were at 166. And so that was 165, 164 for the crochet bucket hat. So, you know, that's quite good as well. Really quick projects, and we're already 2 balls of wool down. And I've still got 3 more things to show you. So having made a hat, I thought in terms of warm weather gear, let's make a variety of stuff. So I thought let's make a scarf. And again, wanting to practice crochet, I went for a crochet pattern. And this is called the Celtic Song Scarf. Again, in this Hayfields Baby acrylic. So this is Fibre Flux Jennifer Dickerson. And again, free Ravelry pattern. There'll be links to everything in the description. And you can also look at my Ravelry if you want more details about exactly what I did, because I did modify this one a little bit. I made it slightly wider. I kind of thought maybe these could be a set, and if they're for a child, maybe a skinnier scarf might be better for a slightly younger child or a younger teen. Crochet just grows so quickly, so this really didn't take me very long, only a few days I think, and it's quite an interesting sort of textured square pattern, and it kind of has the effect of almost herringbone wool. And so now, as you know, me, crochet clothes, I'm not a massive fan. But again, this, like the bucket hat, this was one where while I personally wouldn't wear it because I like my things lighter and drapier and a bit more vintage, it's still a really nice pattern and a really nice design. And so I'm sure somebody out there will love it, and it will go to a good home. Now, in terms of the D-stash, I think I use 71 grams. Yeah, 71 grams. So that's nearly 1.5. I think, oh yeah, in my notes here I've put 1.5. We're rounding, okay? So 164 take 1.5 is 162.5. And so I still had more of this pink left over, but I was a little bit bored of knitting with it, I must confess. So I thought I would try something else. And so you might have seen my 1930s thrift tee slip-on video where I made that unusual 1930s design in a very chunky weight. And because it was one of those vintage yarns that's discontinued and I couldn't find information about, you know, yardage per gram and all of that sort of thing, I bought more yarn than I needed and I had some left over. So I decided I would knit that up as well because it's real wool, but it's very soft. So I thought it would make a really nice hat for somebody if they're not into particularly scratchy or they want something nice and soft and cozy. And so again, free pattern, and you can also see that white stripe there. I had a tiny little bit of the We Are Knitters petite yarn or something it's called left. I had like 2 grams of it left. And so I thought, you know what, I'll add it in. I'll add it in as a sort of stripe detail for this one. So yes, the pattern for this one is another free Ravelry one, naturally. Big, chunky, comfy hat by Erica Kempf Broughton. It's the O-U-G-H sound in English, which could be anything. It could be Broughton, could be Broughton, could be Broughton. You know, English is confusing, so I'm sorry, Erica. But this was the very first project I was able to make using my interchangeable circular needles, and I was able to afford to buy those thanks to the generous support of all of you on Ko-fi or Ko-fi. Thank you so much. It was so much more of a pleasing experience to knit in the round with the exact right circular needles that I needed to make a hat like this. So I can't thank you enough. And I'll definitely be using them again. Actually, I'm also about to cast on a project where I'm going to use them. Thank you so much. This was made possible thanks to you. And this was using, the yarn for that thrifty slip-on was Drops Snow. Yeah, Drops Snow in shade 91 Taupe. When I bought it, it said grape. So it's quite a simple ribbed hat. It looks a little small here, but it really stretches. It's a 3-stitch rib. So it makes for a slightly more interesting design than just a straightforward rib beanie. And I did contemplate putting a pom-pom on the top, but I didn't quite have enough yarn left for that. I do have a little bit of yarn left. I have this much, which is really only a couple of meters. So I'm in the same position that I was with the We Are Knitters, and then I've got the tiniest amount left, but I didn't quite have enough to do another full round. So I don't know what I'm going to use this for. It did suggest felting, so maybe I'll make some felt or something with this leftover bit, but I'm not sure yet. So this one was 63 grams of the Drop Snow and 2 grams of the We Are Knitters. So with this one, because all the others I rounded up, this one I'm going to round down and just call it 1. So that would bring us to 161.5 with the chunky hat. And like I say, I can't believe that's project number 4 this month, and we've used 4.5 balls of wool and it's only been a few weeks. I then returned to the rest of my pink stuff because I kind of just wanted to, like, I was kind of on a roll and I wanted to use up some stuff, you know, and I was really enjoying as well making these projects for others. It was really kind of keeping me going at this particular moment. So I wanted to make another one before I returned to making something for myself. So having previously done several crochet projects with this yarn, I wanted to return to knitting. Again, because of the bold colour, I thought maybe let's keep it simple. So this is a classic ribbed hat by Purl Soho. Again, a free Ravelry pattern. This was one of the most popular when I looked for beanie patterns, and so I thought, okay, let's try that one. It also came in a variety of sizes, so I could make one that was sort of young adult size. Knit in the round, 1x1 rib, and shaped at the top. I'm not in love with the look of these decreases. I've seen, like when I made that Vima beanie, the decreases there looked so stylish and this looks a bit clunky in comparison. But I think it's actually turned out a really cute hat. Like I say, I'm not going to wear this style of hat, but a lot of people do. So hopefully it will go to a good home and keep somebody warm this winter. And I must confess, actually, this yarn as a hat, it's so squidgy. It's going to be really soft on the ears. So I think it was a good choice to use what I had to make several hats rather than try and cobble them together to make some sort of garment. I think this was a better use of that yarn. This project wasn't all of this pink yarn left. I have this much left. I've just been downstairs to weigh and it's 4 grams. But that does mean that this was exactly 50 grams. So we have another skein of yarn, skein of yarn, skein of wool, skein of yarn. -1, which brings us down to 160.5, which I think is actually less. Yes! So obviously, if you've been following along, I started with 164 was sort of my starting total, and then I found a load more yarn. So we are finally beneath what we actually started with. So having made all those things that were quite quick and I had the instant gratification of those, I decided to return next to one of the longer term projects I've been working on as a part of this stash busting, which is this crochet ripple blanket. Because, in one of my previous episodes, I mentioned that I didn't think I was going to have enough yarn to make it anything like the right sort of size to be a blanket. I'd made it deliberately wide enough to go on my double bed, thinking that, 40 skeins of yarn would probably be enough for a blanket. No, it wasn't. So it's this long. You can't see that. If I also grab a tape measure, I can tell you exactly how long it is. Oh boy, not even a metre. It's about 95 centimetres and it is probably 2 metres wide. To make this blanket a square even, I'm going to need to buy another, did I say 40? Maybe I mean 20, yeah, 20 skeins of yarn. Obviously though, because this is sort of a repeat pattern with the chevrons, I also need to figure out how many repeats I want. To me, that's more important than its size, is how many repeats. And so I don't think I've even I'm 2 rows short of a full repeat. I did have some left over. So this one was 28 grams and this one was 20 grams. I've already weighed them. So I need to really puzzle this out about what I'm going to do about this blanket, because it seems a shame to sort of abandon it in this state. I really don't want to frog it again. I've already frogged this yarn so many times into various different projects. So I think I'm going to have to buy more yarn to finish it. However, I was kind of hoping that I wouldn't have to buy more yarn, or I was aiming to not buy more yarn until my stash, the total number of my stash, was under 100. And we're a long way off that yet. So do I count the 19? Because I've got this left. Do I count 19 off my total now and just know that it's going to go up again at some point? Or do I just leave it for now? I don't know. What am I going to do? I need to make a decision. So hopefully by the end of this month, I'll have made a decision about this and I will update you on what I'm thinking. But for the time being, I'm going to leave it for another day. So having ground to a halt on that crochet chevron blanket, I wanted to try something completely different. And I also wanted to tackle some of the less appealing yarn in my stash. So one of the things that I've had knocking about for a while, which you saw was one of the unexpected things I found, was this cone of very cheap, goodness knows, I don't know what it is. And I haven't really known what to do with it. So what I decided I would do is an experiment, basically. For a long time, I've been wanting to try some much earlier knitting patterns from the 19th century, basically. There are quite a few knitting patterns published from the 1890s, that sort of thing, in women's magazines. But earlier in the Victorian era, they're rarer. One of the few, and actually one of the largest collections of them, is held at the University of Southampton. And they have made those available on archive.org, and they sort of have I think they call it the Knitting Reference Library. You can also go and visit this archive, and the University of Southampton is here in the UK, so I would one day like to go and see these things in person. I just don't know about, that depends on my health and access and all that sort of thing. But a large chunk of their collection is available for free on archive.org. So the pattern that I've chosen is actually a shawl pattern. And that seems to be, I looked through a lot of these manuals that are available from the University of Southampton, and a lot of the knitting patterns are not for garments for adults. There's garments for children, there's garments for babies, and there's sort of accessories, but you see very few patterns for wearable adult wear, you know, in terms of what we would consider a sweater or a jumper or a cardigan, something like that. So there's several designs of what they call a Shetland shawl. Now, I'm not an expert in the history of knitting or Shetland knitting or whatever, but my understanding of what a Shetland shawl was different to what they're calling a Shetland shawl. And so in their case, a Shetland shawl is a square lacework shawl that you then fold in half and wear in a triangle. So that's the kind of shawl I'm making. So it's essentially an enormous square. And the pattern I'm working on is from a book called The Winchester Fancy Needlework Instructor and Manual of the Fashionable and Elegant Accomplishment of Knitting and Crochet. And it's by Mrs. Savage, who is quite well known in the history of knitting and wrote and published many knitting manuals in this era, because this one is from 1847. I think this one, the one like the digitized version that I'm looking at, is a second or third edition. So I think this pattern is actually older than that, but this was the version I was able to find. And so if you're interested, I'll leave a link to the pattern in the description. And the pattern I'm working on is from page 18. And it's titled A Very Pretty Point Pattern Adapted for Square Shawls. So vintage knitting patterns, even from the 20th century, the gauge, the yarn recommendations, the needle size, it's all quite unusual to us as modern knitters. 19th century knitting patterns, it's just a load of words that don't make any sense to me. In double Berlin wool or fleecy and in struts knitting cotton for tidies, etc. Okay. And then it says cast on 200 stitches on pins, not needles, they call them pins, number 6. Now, I've been working under the assumption that given that this is the Winchester Fancy Needlework Instructor, and Winchester is the county town of Hampshire in England, that's an old UK number 6, which is a 5mm needle. And so I knitted a sample of this pattern so you can kind of get an idea of what we're going for. So it's a very simple lace pattern, and then it has a border. So I did some research into what double Berlin wool or fleecy means, and I was able to find a book with descriptions of various different types of yarn and what they meant. And so I've made a guess at what my gauge should be based on that. However, so when I cast it on with 5mm needles and the yarn that I had, for a square shawl, it was going to be 120 centimeters square. And all the other patterns I've looked at for square shawls, the given size for the shawl is a yard square. So 120 centimeters is 1 1/3 yards. It's a yard and a foot, basically. So that, to me, felt like it was going to be a massive shawl. And I didn't know whether, if all the other ones they were giving instructions for were a yard square, was it just a case of this one was enormous, or was I wrong with my gauge and my interpretation of these instructions? So I decided to make mine smaller. So instead of casting on 200 stitches, I cast on 181. But then, of course, you have to add the border as well. So it is still going to be maybe a little bit on the large side. But it's a shawl, so it's not like it's not going to fit. So I sort of was puzzling over this for ages. And then I was like, do you know what? Let's just get on with it, because it's an experiment. This was really inexpensive yarn off eBay. We'll see how it goes. This is how far I've gotten. It's interesting. I don't know if I like it, because it's not just, this lace pattern is a garter stitch lace pattern. So it's kind of bobbly. This yarn is very textured as well. It's so hard to know if you're doing it right, because obviously there's no illustration to show you what it's supposed to look like. I don't know what any of these yarns looked like or felt like or how they behaved. So I'm just keeping going. But as you can see, I've got to make, it's basically like repeat the pattern until you get a square. So I have to knit essentially a meter's worth of this, and I'm only about 20 centimeters in. So it's going to be a long old hog. The other thing was, obviously, I tried to get the right number of stitches to get my pattern repeat even, and I just completely miscalculated it. I'm about, I think, 5 or 6 stitches short. I needed more stitches to get another full pattern repeat, because that's something else. At 200 stitches with the sample, this was 20 stitches, and so it's not a complete repeat either. So they obviously weren't concerned about that. So I just went with it. But it's one of those things, to my modern sensibilities, having an incomplete pattern at both ends as well. That's just poor knitting design. It's frustrating. I'm going to carry on with it. Firstly, to use up all this yarn because I'm not going to use this for anything else because it's not very pleasant to knit with, I must confess. And if it doesn't turn out right, it doesn't turn out right, and it was an experiment. Maybe it's something I wear in my historical costuming if I ever do anything 1840s, which is quite likely. I don't know. Let's see how it goes. Let me know what you think. If you know more about this era of knitting than I do, please help me out. I'm trying my best, but any guidance would be greatly appreciated. The only thing about this though, like I say, is it's not particularly pleasant to knit, and it's so repetitive and mindless that I'm not really enjoying it. So I'm gonna keep plodding along on this one. I'm going to make this my upstairs knitting project for knitting in bed, and then my downstairs knitting project, which I tend to work on more in front of the telly. I'm sort of in a lace pattern mood, having started to work on that shawl, but because it's no fun to knit because of the texture of the yarn and it's so boring, I'm starting another one, which is this one. In my like making plans section of that original organising my stash video, I mentioned this one, and I'm using West Yorkshire Spinners signature lace or something like, no, exquisite lace in the colour Lagoon to knit this one. And this is another interesting one because it uses only 3 ounces of 2-ply, which is less than 100 grams, and it's knit on Old UK number 6 and number 9 needles. So number 6 is a 5mm and number 9 is a 3.75, so quite large needles for 2-ply wool. So I imagine the point of this is kind of, and actually, yeah, once you study the picture, the gauge does look very loose and lightweight. So I'm wondering, it's one of those, it's difficult to tell when exactly this pattern is from. There's no date, but there is this illustration on the back. It looks, by the fashions here, we have no Dior New Look element at all. So it's definitely 40s, but I think it's actually early 40s. But you wouldn't know. I originally thought this pattern was 50s from this lady, but looking at like the fur coats and the hats and things on the back of this pattern, there's no mention of rationing, there's no mentioning of coupons. Also, the paper's really good quality, which is unusual for wartime patterns. So yeah, era unknown, let's say mid 1940s. I also really like this pattern because she's randomly stroking a cat. Having been able to buy a set of interchangeable circular needles, thanks to my coffee donors, and supporters, I'm going to try knitting this in the round from the bottom up, just to make it that little bit more interesting, also to see if it's any faster for me. Of course, that will then mean I have to shape the top flat, and I'm a bit nervous about, with lace, if I start going from rounds to knitting and purling, if my tension changes, will it be really obvious? I don't know, we'll see. But yeah, I think I'm going to park the Victorian one for now and make a start on this one instead. So here we are, the end of October has crept up on me, and I haven't actually made, well, I've made progress, but I haven't finished anything else that you haven't already seen this month. So I have my tally here, but I have made a very decent start on this 1940s lace top. I've divided for the sleeves now, not the sleeves, but like this section, the armholes. I've divided for the armholes. This is how far I got this month, and so I've still got this much yarn left, so nothing else is included in the tally for this month. The other thing I've been working on, of course, is my Victorian shawl, and that's nowhere near finished, so that's definitely not included. And it's just, it's getting very dull. It's so repetitive. It's such a long way to go as well. I think that's the thing. It's literally going to be 120 centimeters square of very simple lace pattern. So I'm really not motivated to knit on that one at the minute. But I have really been enjoying working in lace weight again. And as well, with this being like a mulberry silk blend, feels lovely to work with. Yeah, unfortunately, I only got this far. And so that means the grand total for October is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and a half. 5.5. Yeah, so that is about average, we decided. I think that's the 3rd month now out of, what, 4, where I've managed to use 5.5 balls of wool. You may remember that at that rate it will take me 5 years to get through my stash, so we're going to be doing these videos for a very long time. The other thing there actually is, what I've decided to do is include the 19 balls of wool that I used for the ripple blanket, which would take us down to 141.5. And then what I'm going to do is just order enough yarn that I can finish the blanket, and so then that will bring us back up. So I used 19 balls of wool and I'm buying another 20. Let's see if I can't put that order through. There we go. Order's in. So that is plus 20 for 161.5 is our closing total at the end of October. I'll be honest with you, it's been kind of a strange month for me. I've been working on a lot of other non-YouTube projects and I haven't had as much time to knit. I've also not really been able to focus on one project in particular. I suppose I'm recovering from having been very ill and my focus and my motivation isn't really there for a lot of the projects that I had planned previously. And I've definitely been getting the urge to buy something new. And I've been very restrained and I'm only buying yarn to finish that blanket. Every time I go to work on a work in progress, I don't want to work on it. And every time I open my yarn stash to cast on something new, there's nothing in there that really inspires me. So I'm struggling with this a little bit more than I expected this month. I think it's also coming into the sort of peak holiday gift giving season. I always feel obligated to make handmade gifts for my friends and family. The contents of my stash now are so niche that there's nothing really in there that I think I could use to make gifts. You know, I don't have enough of something, or I've got lots of oddments now and I'm trying to use them up. But do my friends and family want my 1940s oddment knits? Probably not. The boredom is setting in. Having looked at this and knowing what I'm working on, what I'm going to say to myself is my goal is not to buy any new yarn until my total is under 100. So that means we've got 61.5 balls of wool to go, but 20 of those are for those blanket and that should go quite quickly. I'm hoping that will motivate me and it'll also give me a break, and then hopefully I can work on something I'm really excited about, and then I can come back to some of the projects that I've lost a little bit of interest in. This is also going to be another weird video in terms of the reveal because I've already given away all those things that I made to give to charity. They're gone, so I can't try them on for you and demonstrate. So I've got on my my thrifty slip-on here, which hopefully you will have seen the video about by now. Obviously the chevron jumper I also finished this month, so there's some footage of that. So it might again be a very short reveal, but let's see what I managed to cobble together for you.